I started to write plays, one of the plays I wrote was a bit like Henry V. I mean, I'd only seen Shakespeare and Shaw. I thought that's how you wrote plays, you know, and kind of masses of scenes and all this, and big scale, you know. And indeed, a big theme, because that would have been 1946, so I was thinking of it in 1947, but it was the dropping of the first atomic bomb, you know. And I thought about this and I thought about it, and I couldn't see how to meet it head on, and yet I had this idea that if I took the siege of Harfleur, which Henry V did, it was the first time that cannons had ever been used, were invented as a siege weapon to bring down the walls of a city. And from then on, you could knock a city down, you know, with cannons. And so, in a way, I thought there was a parallel, you know, between the atomic bomb and the cannon. I never finished the play. It was about 5 acts it was going to be. And the master gunner of the Tower of London was the central character. He'd invented the cannon, which is historically true, you know. But which isn't historically true. He gets blown up by his own cannon right at the end of the play. But I never got that far. So you can see I was very ambitious. I wrote, or didn't write, about 3 plays, you know, when about 17 or 18. And then, of course, I had to do military service. And that rather kind of, I mean, I didn't mind doing military service, oddly enough. I quite enjoyed a lot of it, which I shouldn't have done, really, but I did. I even enjoyed shooting, you know. I turned out quite fortuitously to be quite a good shot, so that when the platoon went off to the firing ranges, and they would all put in some money, you know. The sergeant would say, everybody puts in 6pence or a shilling or something like that, and then whoever gets the high score won the lot. And there were a number of public school boys there who'd had cadet experience, you know, the cadet corps, and I thought, well, you know, they're bound to get it, but I won it, you know. I'm really pleased by that. But otherwise, you know, I wasn't really a soldier, I was just a civilian in uniform, really. But I was posted as I became a sergeant in the education corps. The army had decided that soldiers are going to be educated somewhat, you know, so very basic education. And they made you a sergeant so that you could keep order, you know. I mean, and so you became a rather odd character, because sergeants weren't usually that young. They weren't usually 19, you know, that sort of thing. Usually about 25 or so, at least. So I was posted to Berlin. And Berlin, of course, at that time, was, so about 1950, 4950, was, the Cold War was beginning, you know. And you were very, very conscious of it in the city. It was a divided city surrounded by the Russians. So you got West Berlin, East Berlin, the Russians all ran the whole lot, you know. And right in the middle of Berlin, there's the road going through from west to east. There was a white line painted on the cobbles, and you could stand on this side, and you were in the world of capitalism, and you could take 6-inch step, and you were in the world of communism, you know. And I was very affected by this, really. I thought, you know, here we fought this appalling war against Hitler, you know, and so many people had died. And I knew people who had been killed and that sort of thing. And here we were again, you know, having finished that, a new conflict, you know. And to be able to paint a white line on the cobble and say that side's communism, that side's capitalism, almost made it seem like a gargantuan child's game of some kind, but an awful one, you know, in which the bullets were real. And so it got into my bones, rather, that feeling of the Cold War. And the experience of Berlin was one of a kind of deep concern and tension, you know. We had a lot of fun. I mean, good God, we took over the yacht club that the SS had once owned, and all their tennis courts and things like that, you know. And I was a working class lad who could now sail a yacht up and down the lake, you know, or go to dinner and have a cigar and a brandy. I mean, there were two of us, two sergeants. We used to meet regularly and have a dinner where we had everything, you know, and it hardly cost a bean because it was all subsidised, you know. So there was all that side of it, and yet, you know, out in Berlin, people were half starved, you know. So again, you know, like my brother and I watching the city burn from the hill, you know, we were just thoughtless buggers who sort of sat there having brandies and all this sort of thing. And the ruins of the city were quite daunting, because this was an entire capital city, the centre of which was just a sea of ruins, you know, for the most part. The parts that miraculously seemed to escape it, you know, like the main thoroughfare, Kurfürstendamm, which is like Piccadilly, that sort of thing, you know. That seemed to escape most of it, but all behind Kurfürstendamm, just sea of ruins, bricks, 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 you know, everywhere. And usually just one feeble truck in the middle of it all and a couple of men loading bricks, and it looked like it'd be 1,000 years before they shifted it, you know. But then there wasn't enough, probably you couldn't get cement, I suppose, in Berlin. It was surrounded, everything had to be brought in by rail, air, that sort of thing, you know. And one day I remember I was walking along, people whose houses had been bombed and were reduced to rubble were still living in the cellars. Where else had they got, you know? And it was partly they got nowhere else to go, and partly, I would imagine, hanging on to the house, you know, to make sure that somehow or other somebody didn't suddenly take it off them. Because after all, the experience of people in Germany, you know, have been that kind of experience.